So, right here on Learning Suite, we're going to download these two files. If you just click on the text message, it's going to try to open it. Your browser will probably say, oh, a text message. I can show a text message. Text message is easier than HTML. It just shows it to you. So instead of that, what you'll probably want to do is right-click and choose Save Link As or something to that effect, depending on what browser you're using. And you'll want to save these two files in the same folder. So wherever you put the Excel file, that's where you're going to want to put the text file. Is that your book? Yeah, it is. Interesting. All right. So let's get some, so our chore for today is to get Excel sending email messages. Yes, you got a question. Hold on a second. I'm now remembering there was a question about the project. I guess I don't mind recording this on the project. Go ahead and ask your question, questioner.
So I was trying to figure out how to make it into a like 6 number for a random letter in the string. I looked stuff online and they had to use something as a new random, but it wasn't.
Yeah, that's probably, yeah, okay. So the question is, getting ready for the project that's due when? Saturday, where you're making the Boggle game. How can I pick a random number in the proper range? Let's just take a look. So if I'm going to, choose a random number, here's the way. There's several ways to, well, at least there's at least two kind of mainstream ways to do it. Here's the way I like to use. On a worksheet, there's a function that's perfect for this called rand_between. It lets you pick a number, an integer between an upper and a lower boundary. Equal probability of pulling any of the numbers in the range. And so that's the one I like to use. I'm just going to say worksheet function dot rand_between, and then I will supply a lower boundary, like maybe 0, and an upper boundary, 24. And that will just give me a random number between 0 and 24 each time I execute it. So I think that probably gives you your answer. Several of you are, I've noticed and have had students come to my office, several of you are making two-dimensional arrays to hold the dice. So you're saying, on my rows, I've got, which cube it is, and then in the columns, I've got which face it is. You could do that. That seems really complicated to me. It's unnecessarily complicated. If I was making an array of dice, I would probably, declare it, dim dice 24. It gives me 25 slots as a string. And then I would actually hold in each one of these dice sub 0 equals, and I would just put I would just put 6 characters, AFI, AF, IRSY. So I would just put the cube right in there. And then when it came time to actually, I could then, choose the dice that I want to use, put the order of the dice, and at that point, I could then pick one of these just at the point where I'm writing it out. So I could use, some combination of random, rand_between, but then use the mid function in rand_between 0 and 5, or between 1 and 6, and use the mid function to just pull one of these letters out. We don't really have to push each one of these sides into its own slot in the array. You could do that if you want to, it's fine. It's just working with two-dimensional array, a little more work. And if I were solving this with an array, that's how I would do it. Questions? All right. All right, so let's get some background on the project we're doing today. But another question?
Would there be a way to rotate it so that it's random how it falls, like in the real world?
Oh, you mean the question is there a way to rotate it so it's random how it falls? You mean actually how dice bounce on a table? Simulate the motion of a dice bouncing on a table?
When it lands, like when you click the roll dice, it lands, all the letters are facing up, but in real life they don't all.
Oh, you want to rotate them, one of 4 ways. Yeah, that's probably a little more difficult, but it's not too bad. You can at least get 3 of them here, right? Because you can come to format cells, and you can come to alignment, and you could align the text in the cell that way. Well, that gets you kind of halfway, so you can't, anyway, you could do some of that. I guess you could get it straight, and that is tilted that way, tilted that way. So that would just not let you put it there's just one orientation you can't get to that way. So if you really wanted to do that, I would probably do it with graphics. Get 25 graphics and then use those to. All right. So here's the context. So the project for today is trying to figure out how are we going to get Excel to send email messages and to send text messages. And so we are going to do that using a Gmail mail account. So it's going to be different. If you're going to use Outlook, it's totally different. If you have Outlook installed on your machine, it's actually easier than what I'm going to show you today. But I've never been an Outlook user, and so I really don't know how to do that. It's apparently going to be in the chapter in the book here before too long, so you might have access to that if you want to do it. But we're going to send mail with Gmail today. How many of you have a Gmail account? Yeah, okay, you're in good shape. So here's the context. Imagine that you've been hired, by the National Highway Transportation Safety Bureau. Maybe you're doing some consulting for them, or maybe you work for them, and and you've been assigned to look over a particular potential recall for the anti-lock brake system, the anti-skid brake system. And so you've been given a set of complaints. That's what these are. These are letters where people wrote to the National Highway Transportation Safety Bureau and said, I had a problem with my car. And all of these were somehow flagged as dealing with the anti-skid brake system. And so we've got the name of the person, the email of the person, where they're from, the letter date. Some of these go back pretty far to 2000, 1999. Anyway, so some of these are kind of old. But then you get some details, about what happened here as well. So here's the summary. The paint is peeling off in sheets. Oh, and the brakes don't slow the vehicle. So when pulling into a turning lane, went to apply the brakes and the pedal went all the way to the ground. Then something, probably I tried to press. The ABS failed. Loss of control in an accident. Okay, so you've got, kind of the complaint summary here, and that's the information you've got. So here's what we'd like to do is we'd like to say, we're getting ready to, we're examining doing a recall dealing with the stuff you're talking about here. Just want to send each of these people an email message that says, I'm, newly assigned to your case, and if you have anything, we're examining this, and if there's anything else you want to tell me, here's my contact information, and, I'll be in touch. So the point is, taking the data that's here, sending off an email message to do that. And so the other file that we downloaded, I'll just open it up here in the browser so we can take a look at it. So it's like a template that we would use for making any sort of text file. You can edit it however you want. But we've got the first line, which will become the subject of the message. We're trying to get something that will get them to open it. And if I drive a 1999 Ford F350, and if I got an email that said, problem with your 1999 Ford F350, I would think, that's probably one I should look at. Whoever is sending this knows I have a 1999 Ford F350, and that's probably one I'm going to open. So you don't want to get something that's going to get them to open it. Dear whoever your first name is, when I heard about the trouble you had with your 1999 Ford 350, I was deeply troubled. Recently been assigned to your case. I wanted to give you my contact information, let you know the National Highway Transportation Bureau is currently evaluating the Ford anti-lock brake system for a possible recall. If you would like to provide any more information about the incident that you experienced back in 2000, whatever that is, please don't hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, my name, safety analyst, and provide my telephone number. Okay? So, we try to make it sound personal and individualized, even though, of course, it's not. And that's the point, I guess. So we've got all the information we need here. If only we can figure out how to work to send an email message. That's the task for today. Questions? Ready to go? Let's do it. All right, so let's begin by looking at, we got a couple of modules here. Module 1 has send mail. This is the one we're going to work with today. I just thought, we're going to declare a bunch of variables, and so rather than type them all from scratch, I said, let's go ahead and start with some variables declared. These are the ones we're going to work with today. So those are all here. And that's all there is in this sub-procedure right now is a bunch of dim statements. Then let's take a look at mod Gmail. So here in mod Gmail, I've given you a function that will send a message through using your Gmail account. So it's a function. It's called send Gmail. It's written right here in VBA. it's going to return true or false, depending on whether it was successful in sending the message. Now, in the world of sending email, you don't ever really know if the user received the message. There are several things that could happen to it along the way. It could get, the email address could be wrong, so it goes to nobody. The email address, it could get filtered somewhere along the way. So you're never really sure if the user got it, but we're at least going to know, were we successful in contacting the server and dispatching the message. So when we go to send that message, before the mail server even accepts it, it's going to look at the email address and say, yeah, does this even look like something I can deal with? And so if it returns true, what it means is you sent it a well-formed email, and the server accepted the message, and it's going to try to deliver it. So it'll let you know if that part of the communication happened well. We've got 3 variables that we declare here. 2 of these, message and config, are objects. And so we are going to create objects that have properties and methods that are needed for sending email. These objects are just built into the Windows operating system. They're not a part of VBA. They're not a part of Excel. We're just saying connect onto these objects that are part of Windows, and we'll use the functionality of those objects to be able to send these messages. So the first one here is where we are going to configure our what's called a CDO. Stands for Common Data Object, I think. And it is a configuration object. It is specifically for getting us hooked up to the mail server that we're going to communicate with. And so we are going to say the name of that object. It's got a property called fields, a collection of fields, and those fields have really long names. So the name is http://schema-microsoft.com CDO configuration / and then something else. And so instead of having these really long lines, I said, let's just make that into a string variable and then concatenate that string onto the actual name of the field. So these fields have long names, and that's what we're just going to give those fields values. And so this first one, we're going to set the send using field to 2. 2 means we're going to send, there are like 3 different ways that we can send messages. One of them is using a host name and a port, and that's what we're going to do. When we're going to communicate with Gmail's outgoing mail servers, we tell it specifically the host we want to talk to and the port it's listening on, and we will send that. Have we talked about ports and anything in this class? Anytime you communicate with a server on the internet, it takes 2 things. You've got to have the address of the server. We typically think of that as a host name, right? So we'll say, gmail.com. And your browser will actually resolve that host name into an IP address, and it makes the communication with the IP address. So it's the IP address of the server that we're going to talk to. That's the first thing. But that server could have dozens of services or more kind of listening for traffic to come to it. And so you always have to specify a port. This is just part of the internet protocol, is I got to specify the host and the port. Well, when you use a browser, you don't specify the port. That's because the browser says, look, if you don't tell me which port it is, it's going to be the default port. What's the default port for talking to a web server? Which port do web server software listen on? Yeah, port 80, is the port that is. And so, if you're on a web page and you get bored one day and you decide, I'd like to see if this is listening on, what's going on the port. Well, you could come right in here, and you can tell it, just put right after the URL, put a colon and then the port number, and hit enter. That's still going to, never mind. Oh, that's because HTTPS by default isn't port 80. It's, I'm not sure I know, 435? I'm not sure. Let's go to some more vanilla site. Google.com. This should be port 80:80. Oh, that's HTTPS too. The world turned into HTTPS. Anyone look up the default port for HTTPS? It's 443. 443. And there. So I put the colon 443 on that, and it goes, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. 443, and it's still communicating with that server. So tell it the port. But typically, you don't have to tell it the port because your browser goes, oh, it's HTTPS, it's 443, it's HTTP, it's port 80, and those are the defaults. So that's what we're saying. We're going to supply both a host name and a port to communicate with the mail server. This is a random, unrelated question. How? Want to be able to look at two modules at the same time. Now, here's the first thing. If you want to look at two different parts of the same module at the same time, there's a trick. Right here above the scroll bar, there's a little divider window. And you can split this into two different parts of the same module. No extra charge. I don't think I've ever shown that in class before. I forget it's there. But if I want to see two different modules simultaneously, I can do that. I just have to make sure that this window is not maximized. And so right here, these three buttons right here, not the top X, but the next X down, allows you to close the current module or to restore the window so it's not maximized. So you could say, I want to have these two open, and depending on how much screen estate you have, you could see more or less of those. Once you're here, you can choose like window tile vertically or tile horizontally, so you can fit more in. If you have more screen, it makes more sense. On this low resolution I have here, it's not profitable. I got to look at one of these. Is there a keyboard shortcut to cycle through modules quickly? I would try Control Tab. I'm not sure. Yeah, Control Tab looks like it does it. Bloop, 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 bloop. Control Tab. Yeah, glad I could help. It wasn't totally random. At least it was in the domain of VBA. I thought you were going to ask about, am I trying anything to regrow the hair on my head or something? Have you been trying Rogaine? Because that might help you out or something. All right. That would have been more random. Now I have forgotten what I was talking. Oh, we're talking about a port. Okay, so that's what we're saying. If we're going to be talking with an Exchange server instead of an SMTP server, we wouldn't use port. We would use something else. And so that's what we're saying here. Next parameter says, what is the host name that we're going to talk to of the SMTP server? SMTP stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. It's the way we send email on the internet. It's one of the ways. It's the primary way. And so that's going to tell me that will resolve to a particular IP address, smtp.gmail.com. Not necessarily the same IP address for you as it does for me, because it's not just one server they have. But when I ask, what machine am I communicating with, I give it the host name. It gives me back an IP address. In fact, if I just come and look at my command prompt, I could say ping smtp.google. Is it google.com? Is that what it was? Or was it gmail.com? Gmail.com. That should resolve to an IP address, and so that's actually the IP address of the machine that I'm working with, 74.125.28.108. Did anyone else do that along with me and get a different IP address? I would expect you to get a different one, but I'm not positive. Anyway, that doesn't really matter. So that's that set of numbers allows me to route, or allows the internet to route my request to that machine. Yeah.
You would do this tomorrow from Atlanta. Would you get a different IP address?
So the question is, if I did this tomorrow from Atlanta, would I get a different IP address? I don't know. Let's ask William. He's from Georgia. Is it different in Georgia? Say yes. Yeah. It would be different. But the reason it's different, is because. Imagine, this gets me to one machine. This is the address of a machine. And so, do we think that if there's any machine in the world that can handle all the outgoing mail for every Gmail account in the world? No. And so what part of how we balance that is we say we're going to give out different IP addresses that go to different machines that all resolve to all have the same host name. And so that's part of the way that we kind of balance the load on the internet. You'll have multiple outgoing message servers, all share the same host name, smtp.gmail.com. Got it? Okay, so then we got to tell it which port. So the question is, which port is this Google server listening on? And it listens on port 465. How many ports are there on a machine? Tens of thousands. I mean, port numbers can go up really large. And it turns out that the default place that we listen for encrypted traffic on SMTP is 465. I think it's 465. Anyway, there's a few ports that are standard. This is one of the standard ports. And it's the one that Gmail uses. How would you find out what this port would be if you didn't know? Or you're going to be, how could you find that out? Well, you could just Google it. A place like Gmail, but What if you have to, excuse me, what if you have to configure this to work with your mail server at your new job? Well, the information it takes to connect this program up to the mail server is the same information that a regular email client needs to know to be able to connect up to it. You know, so if you're using Windows, not Windows, but see, Mac has some kind of mail program. It's called Mail, isn't it? Yeah, and it's a traditional mail client. It hooks up to a back end, it downloads your messages, and it keeps them there in the Mac. So if you're going to hook up your Mac to that, you've got to know all this information. And so the IT department that's managing that, this is not secret information. This is information they're saying, oh, you're allowed to work with our email address. You have an email address here. This is information we'll give you. You might have to ask someone for it, but it's available. Okay, then there are three different kinds of ways that we would authenticate. One is no authentication. I'm sorry, 0 is no authentication. One is basic authentication, and then another one is fancy authentication, and NTLM authentication. So anyway, we're using one, which is a basic authentication. That's the way that Google's expecting us to send this information. We then have to tell it, you know, who it's from. So this is the account that we're going to authenticate with to be able to send the message. We got to give it the password, and we're going to tell it we're going to use SSL, Secure Socket Layer, which means the information that's passed across the network is going to be encrypted. So we're not sending our password in clear text. It's going to be encrypted. That's the way that the Gmail outgoing server takes to be configured. Questions here? So that should get us connected up to the server so that we can send the message, but it says nothing about what message we want to send. That's what the message object is for. So let's take a look a little bit lower. So down here, the message object has a property called to, message.to, and that is the email address that we're sending the message to. From is the email address that we're sending it from. Now, you'll notice that these parameters, send to and from, PW, subject, body, these are all things that are passed into this function. So when I call the function, I've got to supply it this information. From the account we use here to authenticate, that's who we're saying the message is from. We'll supply a subject for the message and a body for the message. It turns out there are two properties. There's a text body just for plain text, and there's an HTML body. So if you want to get fancier and you know HTML, you're going to do tags and maybe put some images into your message, then you can set that up as an HTML message. And modern mail clients will actually, I mean, it's okay to have both bodies sent with the message. You don't have to pick one or the other. You can send them both, and then the client can pick which one they want to display. Do I want to see this just as text or as HTML? And they can deal with both of those. These others, organization and sender and organization, these are going to get ignored by the Gmail server. So who are they going to say the sender is? Whoever authenticated to send the message. And if you tell it it's from someone else, they're just going to ignore that. Have you ever gotten an email that purported to be from someone it wasn't from? I mean, look at me, like the reply to and the email it came from, you know, it says it's from your mom, and it's not. It's from someone who's trying to steal information from you. It turns out the SMTP protocol allows you to do that. It allows you to send the message, and by the way, say this came from somebody totally different than sent the message. So the protocol allows it, and so the objects support that, but Google says, oh no, we're not going to do that. And so that's just not available here. But I wanted to kind of leave them here so you could see them. Same thing with the organization. Gmail is not going to do anything with what you specify as the organization. You can, however, specify a reply to parameter. So you've had that message where it said, you know, it came from someone, you hit reply and it replies to someone different. You can set that up here. That's kind of nice. Now, if we pass in an attachment, and by that I mean a path to an attachment. So here we've got an optional parameter called attachment. Then there's a method of the message called add attachment. You just pass it the path to the file you want to attach to the message, and it attaches it. Can we attach multiple files to a message to send it? Sure, yeah, I could just call add attachment multiple times with different attachments, but I've simplified for this function to where it only takes one. You know, if you wanted to send multiple ones, you'd have to modify the function, and you can do that. So the question is, well, how would you do it if you want to do multiple? One way to do it is what you suggest, attachment 1 as string, comma, optional attachment 2 as string, comma. You could say, you know, you could put it as many of those as you want, or you could pass it in as, you know, some kind of a formatted string. So you could say, you know, give me a string that has the whatever attachment paths you want separated by commas. And then you could parse that out into an array, and then you could iterate across the array and add them on. You could accept it as an array argument. You have to pass an array to it. There's several ways that you could do it. Okay, so once I've got my message all configured, I'm going to connect the message to the configuration. So the message object has a property called configuration. It's an object property. It just allows me to connect up this message to some other object. So I will say set, because I'm binding an object variable to an object. Remember, config was the name of the object that we created here that we were getting configured to work with the server. And so we're just saying I've got the configuration. Now I've got my message. I've connected them together. And now I'm getting ready to send the message. But if it fails, I don't want the code just to stop. I want it to report that it failed. So we're saying if there's an error, just keep on moving. Try to send the message. If the error number is 0, what does that mean in terms of an error? What error happened if it's error number 0? No error happened. And so if the error number is 0, that means the sending of the message was successful. It means that the server accepted the message and is trying to deliver it. And so we'll set the name of the function equal to true. It's just going to say, respond back, it was true. Otherwise, we're going to set the name of the function to false. The message failed. And just in this environment, I thought, you know, it would just be nice to just kind of print out some information about the message, who I was trying to send it to, who it was coming from, and the time it happened, the error number, and the description of the error. So if we get the error, we'll at least get some information. It turns out the error messages don't tend to be that helpful, but at least we'll know all the information that we have available. Then we're done with the error trap. By setting an object variable equal to nothing. Remember, nothing is that special object that says this this variable isn't connected onto any object. What that does is it tells the object, oh, you know, you're no longer connected to the variable, and it tells that object to clean up after itself, to free up the memory with that object and release it back to the operating system. So the two objects that we created up here, we are explicitly telling it in code, we're done with this. It turns out these two lines are supposed to happen automatically when I hit the end function. It should say, oh, done with those variables, and release it back into the wild. And I think it probably does, but Microsoft kind of has a history of not being really good about that with their software. And so a lot of developers like to say, you know what, I want to expressly release the memory associated with those variables. Just in case, I don't want to trust Microsoft to do it because I've been stung in the past. In fact, what would happen if each time I called this, I created those objects, I got to the end function, I didn't release the memory for those objects? What would happen to that memory? Yeah, I'm no longer connected on to those objects. I have no way to tell them to free themselves. And so that memory is now allocated, and it will be unavailable for anything else until the machine gets rebooted. So that, in fact, when that happens, that's what's called, if you've heard the term memory leak, that's what that is. So the idea of a memory leak is I have consumed memory, and when my program's done running it, I haven't freed it up. And so I now have less memory to work with. It's like some of my memory has leaked away. It really hasn't. It's just I don't have as much to work with because it's allocated. And until I reboot, there's no way to free it up. Okay, so you ask Microsoft, they'll tell you this is not necessary. Some people think, you know what, it doesn't hurt to put it there. I'm going to put it there. So that's the function to send a message. So we're going to be using this today in class. Questions? Yes?
Just want to make sure I understand. These two objects, they exist, or did you kind of create them?
Yeah, the question is, so these two objects, do they just exist, or did Professor Allen, did you create them? Magnanimous professor that you are, you know, for us to use. And the answer is they come with Windows. And so they're just built into the Windows operating system. You don't have to download them. You don't have to go get them from somewhere. So this code will not work on the Mac operating system because these Windows don't exist. If you were to try to run this, you know, under Excel for Mac. But they do exist in Windows, and you can count on them being there as long as you're running, you know, like Windows XP or later, something like that. You know, would this work in Windows 98? Maybe, I'm not sure. I'm sure it would work in Windows XP and later. Other questions?
So, in the reset it to nothing, nothing was is an object.
Yeah, so the question is, what are we really doing here when we say set the object equal to nothing? Nothing is a special object that we use to connect object variables up to tell VBA I'm no longer using that object variable. And so I mean, it is an object. It's a very simple object. But when I make that binding, the interpreter says, "Oh, you're done with the variable. The variable is now that object is now disconnected from its variable," and the interpreter tells the object to clean up after yourself. The object has to know how to clean up after itself, but the interpreter will tell it to do that. All right, well, let's go ahead then and do something that will actually call this function and send a message. Whew. It will take some doing to get there, so let's get to it. And you can tell because we've got a lot of variables we've got to work with to be able to do it. So let's go ahead and begin with this one called template. So what I want to do is, in general, the idea is this. I want to read my template off of that file. Where are we? Here's the text. I want to read this file from, what was it called? It's called like email message.txt or something like that. I want to read this in, and there are some parts of this that are going to be the same for every message that I send out. Well, I mean, that's the part that's just text. But even of the tags, some of these are going to be the same. You know, for which of these tags are going to be the same for everything that I send out today? For every message. My phone number is going to be the same. My name's going to be the same. What the recall is, this data set is a recall for anti-lock brakes. And so that's going to be the same. But the year that the thing failed, the make that we're talking about, the first name of the person, the model year, and so forth, this is all going to be different. And so even though we've got some of these tags, some of them I can set as soon as I read the file into memory, and then some of them I've got to reset every time I get to a new message to send. And so we're going to start by reading this in, and then we're going to populate some of these values. And that will be our template once it's populated. We'll use that template then to spawn the messages, to modify the template, send the message, modify the template, send the message, modify the template, send the message. Okay, so the first one we're going to fill in here is template. So let's go ahead and set that for a value. Actually, we've got one here called template path that we're going to need. So I'm going to set the template path equal to, I got to find out where that template file is. And there are several ways that we could do it, right? We could ask the user to specify the template they want to use. And depending on how sophisticated the system was I was making, that might be exactly what I want to do, right? Maybe the system I'm building has 17 different templates, and the user might make more at any time. And so we might want to let them choose. But in this case, we're just going to say, listen, just go get the template. We know it's going to be in the same location where this workbook is, and we know the name of it. And so we'll just code that right here. So template path is going to be this workbook dot path concatenated with application dot path separator concatenated with path separator concatenated with what was the name of the file? Is it email underscore message?
Yeah.
So that should be the full path to where that message is. So now that I've got the path specified, I'm ready to open that file. So open, and then the full path to the file I'm trying to open, template, template path for input. So this always seems a little backwards to me. I'm opening the file. I'm bringing information from the file into my program. So I'm taking information out of the file, bringing it into my program. Is that output or input? It's input. From the program's perspective, I'm reading something into the program, and so I'm opening it for input, as number 1. I'm going to go ahead and put my close statement, close number 1. And then I'll work in between here. All I want to do is read what's in the file into a variable. And so I can use the input statement for that. So I will say template, my other variable template, equals input. And now here I got it. It always seems a little backwards to me, but here I tell it, first I tell it how many characters I want to read. If I want to read the first 80 characters from that, I'll say 80 characters. And then I tell it, which file I want to read it from, file number 1. That should read in the first 80 characters. I'm going to go ahead and run my code right to there. And hopefully it'll work. Okay, so I should have a variable called template that's 80 characters long. There's the first 80 characters. If I ask for the length of it, it should darn well better tell me it's 80 characters long, because I only told it to read in 80 characters. Now, how many characters do I want to read in? I want to read them all. What's this stopping at 80 business? So I got to tell it, bring in all the characters, but I've got to give it a number there. So let me come back here and open that file again. With that file open, there's a function called LOF, length of file. And I tell it, file number 1. LOF1 will tell me how many characters there are in that file. And so once that file is open, I can ask it how many characters there are, and I can use that to read in all the characters. So input, how many characters, the length of the number 1 file, which file do you want to read it from, the number 1 file. That should then read in the full template. So now if I ask it to show me the template, I've got the full thing here. First line of this template is going to be our subject. The rest of it will be the body. When I heard about the trouble you had with your whatever. Okay, how are we doing, folks? Questions? So far, so good? Nothing really new here. We've worked with opening files before, variables. Okay. So let's start off just by populating the parts that we know are going to be the same. And so that was agent name, agent phone, and system. I think that was all of them. So I have variables for those. Agent name, system, agent name, and phone. So let me just go ahead and fill those in. System equals, I guess I'll call it the anti-lock braking system. ANTI lock braking system. Does that make sense in my string here? Bureau is currently evaluating the Ford anti-lock braking system for a possible recall. That seems to make sense. All right, I'm going to put in my agent name and my agent phone. Put in your own name here. Don't put my name in. If you start sending emails to someone, you should at least put your own name on it. Don't put my name. 801-422-1206. Okay, so now I've got those in variables. How am I going to take what's in these variables and drop them into my template? If you still need credit for class participation, this would get it. What function am I thinking of? What would be a great function to use to do this? I've got this string with these tags in it, and I want to replace those tags with the values that are in these variables. What might be a good function to replace something? Yeah. Replace! That's correct. Okay, so I'm going to change did you need full credit?
I got a gold star one down.
Gold star. Gold star is not full credit, but that's full credit, so you're in good shape. Yeah. All right, so, okay, so I'm going to change my template. So my template right now looks exactly like this. I'm going to change it to actually have my name in it. So I'm going to set a new value for the template, TMPLATE. Template equals the results of the replace function. Replace function says, great, what do you want to start with? I want to start with template. I want to look for something. I want to replace it with something. What do I want to look for? I want to look for system. I want the angle brackets and everything. I know they're not really such thing as an angle bracket. It's a greater than, less than symbols, but angle bracket. And then I'm going to replace that with my variable system. Did I really need to put this into a variable to be able to do it? No, I could have put anti-lock braking system right there. But this is just going to make my code be a little bit more readable. So I've got agent name, agent phone, and so if I run those 3 replace statements and then print off my template again, we should see, oh, I replaced them, but I didn't run the part that filled this in. Oh, darn it. Okay, so I got to run back up, and it got rid of the name because the agent name variable was blank. I never put my name into it. So I'm going to have to open the template again, read it again, and then run that. Okay, so now I should be able to come see that template and see that those parts are populated. Yeah. So now my name is there, my telephone number is in, and if we scroll over here, we should see, yeah, anti-lock braking system is now integrated into the document. The rest of it, I'm going to have to fill in per line. But my template now is set up to this point. Feeling pretty good about it. Questions? Ready to go? Okay. So next step, let's go ahead and create the structure that's going to allow me to iterate across the set of records so that I can start working with the actual message. And so I've got this S variable here as a worksheet that's going to allow me to bind onto a particular worksheet. What's the name of our worksheet? Data. So data is the name of the worksheet. So let me just go ahead and hook up my S variable to the worksheet. Set S equal to worksheets, the one named data. So that'll give me a nice reference to that worksheet. We've got a variable up here called R, I think. Yeah, R is an integer. And so we are going to set R equal to 2. I don't want to be starting on the first row, start on the second row, which my data starts. R equals 2, and then we'll set up the normal loop we've done multiple times now. Do until s dot cells row R, comma 2. Can't look at column 1 because column 1's blank. Column 1 is where we're going to put the signal that we've sent the message. So we're going to do until we don't have anything here in column number 2, until that value is equal to a 0-length string. We'll increment R in the middle here. R equals R plus 1. And so now I've got a loop that will run through all those records and stop when it's done. Nothing new here. So now let's think about the other variables that I'm going to have to replace. We're going to have our first name variable. And we've got a variable up here called first name. Let's go ahead and fill it in. So inside my loop, let's read the first name. First name is equal to s.cells. Row is going to be number R. Some column. Where's the first name? First name is column 2. And so we could put a column 2 here. There's something that I had been programming in VBA for not quite 20 years, but most of 20 years before I knew you could do this. And I'm not sure how long you've been able to do this. But did I tell you this? For cells, you can actually put a letter for the column. Yeah, you don't have to say column 2. You could say column B as a string, and it'll figure it out. First time I saw that in code, I thought there's no way that's going to work, and was really surprised to find out it works. And what's the value?
Can you use next instead?
Oh, can I use next instead of loop on a do loop? The answer is no. I have to use loop. Thank you. Yeah, loop's the keyword that has to be there. Yeah, next goes with what kind of loop? The for loop. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so we have first name, and it turns out that these are all exactly the same as the variable names, and so we can just trust there's already a variable named model year. So I'll come in here and do the same thing for model year. In fact, maybe I'll maybe I'll just kind of make a template here. Okay, so model year is in which column? Oh, the model year is over here in column K. So that will be column K for model year. My next variable that I need is called make. And make is in column I. My next one is called model name. And model name is in column J. I peeked ahead when we were there. Okay, I've got those. When I heard about your model year, make, model name, we've already got those done. By the way, the replace is going to replace every occurrence. And so I've got model year twice in this file. I'm in great shape. Only thing I have, I've got system, make is done. I need fail year. I think that's it. Only have one more to go, failure. Kind of sounds like failure. 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 Failure is a little bit different because I don't really have a column that's the fail year. How am I going to get it? We could take the right 4 characters off of the letter date. So this is when they told us about the problem. We're really not sure when it failed, but that's the best guess we have for it. And what's that? Oh, there is a fail date. Yeah, you're right. So great, we got the fail date. Let's use that. I've only been using this data for 8, 9 years. I've never noticed that. Okay. So letter date, fail, fail date. Column L. Thank you very much, Amber. Okay, fail date. Okay, so we could take the rightmost 4 characters off of fail date, or because it's a date, there's a function called year. I just pass it a date, it gives me back the year. That's what we'll do. So for our fail year, I'm going to look at column L, and I'm going to feed, let me put a capital L in there, I'm going to feed it to the year function, Y-E-A-R. And so this will give me the year extract off just the year from that date. So that should give me what I need to be able to build up the message. So now, instead of changing the template any further, because the template now is set up to be how we need it for every message, I'm going to say that my message is going to equal, look at the template, replace every occurrence of first name with my variable first name. The next one's tricky. I'm going to get the model year part put in, and then someone tell me what I've got wrong here. That's right. So I've taken the template, made that change, and put the results into message. I do not want to look back at the template for this next one. Now, and from here on the rest, I want to modify the message as I go down. So I'm going to just make a couple more of these and bring in make, model name, and failure. I see your question. I will get to you as soon as I'm done copying and pasting. And so I'm going to put a breakpoint here at the end of my loop. I'll run that code. And now if I look at my message, I'm hoping to see that it is totally specified. Dear Evelyn, when I heard about the trouble you had with your 1990 Jeep Cherokee, I was deeply troubled. It sounds so sincere. And it looks like I've gotten rid of the rest of those tags. Okay, there's a question over here somewhere. Here and then here.
The replace function, you said it replaces every instance.
The question is, that replace function, it replaces every instance, and the answer is, by default it does. I think there's another argument here that says, yeah, I can tell it where to start looking in the string, and I can tell it how many to replace. So I can tell it, you replace, start at the 87th character and change the next 4 occurrences. But if I don't tell it where to start, I don't tell it how many to replace, it replaces them all. Question here. Yeah, so the question is, couldn't we just skip this whole block and taken this value and dropped it in right here? The answer is yes. Why did I do it this way? I did it this way just because it's going to make the code a lot more readable. So, well, I know it's a lot more readable. It's somewhat more readable. And yeah, it's a little less convoluted. If I were doing this, like just for me to use, that's probably exactly how I would do it. But doing it in such a way that you can look at it on the example and follow it through, this is just going to be easier to read. Okay, so it looks like I've got my message set up. I think I'm ready to send the message. Did I miss the failure? Failure. Oh, I've got one more to go. Oh no, I think it's here. Failure. I think it was just scrolled down. But I do need to read in the email address of the person I'm sending it to, and that's over here in column 4, column D. So we've got a variable for email. Let's go ahead and read that one in. Even though we're not going to be putting that into the message, we'll need it to send the message. So email equals whatever we got in column D. All right, so I'm going to see, I've run right to here. I'm going to go ahead and stop my code, run it again to that point. Make sure I've got an email message. Yes, the email is there. By the way, all these emails come to my inbox. So don't send them all, please. Okay. Oh yeah, we'll send it now. Yeah. I'll know who sent it. Okay, so what else do I need to be able to dispatch the message? Oh, let's see. Right now, I've got my message. My message has both the message and the subject. I'm going to have to split that apart. So let's look at the message. This starts off with the subject. And I've got to get that into 2 separate parameters. And so let's do that next. So my message is all built up here right now. We've got a variable declared up above called position, or just POS, short for position. So let's set the position equal to where that first line ends. I want to find, remember this text file is really one long string of characters. How do we know where the first line ends and the second line begins? There's a pair of special characters at the end of that line, carriage return and a line feed. Together they're known as the VB new line. There's a constant for it. So we'll do this. The position equals the in string, INSTR, looking at my message, starting at the first character, looking at the message, and looking for the VB new line sequence, the new line sequence, VB new line. So then my subject, again declared above, is going to equal the left of message starting with the position -1. If I take it all the way to position, it's going to get the carriage, it's going to get the carriage return character with it. And so I want one less than where it found that carriage return. And now that I've got the subject there, go ahead and run that line. Oh, I got to run the line to get the position first. Now if I ask for the subject, then I've got just that first line. Looks great. But now I also have to get that first line off of the message. So message got to equal something different as well. So message is going to equal the mid of message, starting at the position +2. Because remember that line, the end of line sequence is 2 characters. So I found it there, found that character. I don't want to start there. I don't want to start at the next one. I want to start at the following one, and so it's +2 characters. And so if I execute that, I should see that my message now no longer has the problem with your 1990 Jeep Cherokee. It starts right off with Dear Evelyn. So I've successfully split those apart. Why did I want to split those after I've injected it instead of before? And could I have split it as soon as I read the file in? Sure. Are you answering the question? Yeah, answer the question.
It's because of the replace. You replace in multiple spots.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. If the message has the subject line built into it, when I say replace make, it replaces it both in the subject and below. Then I can split it off. I don't have to replace it separately in the subject. So that's great. Okay, so looking at mod Gmail, what does it take? It takes who I'm sending it to, check. It takes a subject, got it. It takes a body, got it. It takes an attachment, there's no attachment. So the only things I'm missing now are these two arguments, who it's coming from and the password. Once I've got those things accepted, I'm ready to send the message. So, good news, folks. And in reorganizing the class, I'd forgotten that this example had a user form in it. Typically, by the time we get to this example, you've done user forms, which is coming up after the midterm, which is next week. Study guide will be available Saturday. So here's a form. I'm just going to, you don't need to do this along with me. If I wanted to edit it, I could double click this and we could see the form. I'm going to teach you how to do something like this. You'll provide, your username and your password, and we'll be able to have access to it. Here's how we invoke that user form. I don't want to do it down here inside my loop, because I don't want to prompt the user for their username every time we send a message. So instead, why don't we do that first thing? So as soon as this thing runs, I'm going to say the name of the form, frmpassword.show. That's going to show the form, and it's going to halt the execution of this code until the form is closed, just like an input box does. It's going to wait for the user to say OK or cancel or something. And in fact, the form is set up so that if the user clicks cancel, it deletes the password off of the form. And so we'll just say this. If, and I'm going to go find the password on the form. frm password, that's the name of the form, .txt password, that's the name of the box that holds the password. That's an object, and I want the text property of that. If that equals a zero-length string, it means the user pressed cancel. Or it means they didn't put a password and they clicked OK. Either way, I'm not going to be able to send this message. So if it's blank, I want to be done. Exit the sub procedure. Then exit sub. Question?
Does that frmpassword.show bring up you just showed us?
frmpassword.show brings up that dialog box. That dialog box is called a user form.
Is it the one you just
It's the one that we just pulled up.
address and password?
It's address and password. Yeah, it's like an input box that has two fields in it. Woohoo! That's better. And one of them actually is a password field. I mean, you type in it, and it won't show your characters. It echoes like some other character, star or a dot or something. All right, we've got a username and a password as a variable. Let's just read those off of the form. So we can say username equals frmpassword .txt account. That's the name of the object. How would you know that? You would know that because you made the form. You created the form and did it. If you import it from somewhere else, you could look at it, and you'll get comfortable with that once we deal with user forms. For now, just believe. So I'm going to set the username, and I'll read the value off of that form. I will set the password variable equal to the password off of that form. I think that's it. I should be ready to send this message. Shall we send it? Yeah.
Good job doing this. Would we check the account?
So here's the question: if we were really doing a good job at this, would we want to check to make sure the email is well formed? The answer is yeah, we probably should. But the place to check it actually is not down here in this code. The place to check that would be up here on this form. So when the user presses OK, we would want to look over those things, make sure it looks good. And if it's not, we're not even going to let them close the form. We're going to stop. Hey, no good. Go fix it. And we'll learn how to do that when we get to user forms. But that that data validation belongs here. That way, if we use this form for something else to collect credentials for a Gmail account, that's all built right into it. Yep. All right. Okay, so now we've got everything we need. Username, password, who it's going to, subject, and body. So now inside my loop, right here at the very bottom, before I increment R, it's time to send the message. Let's do this. Remember, send Gmail is a Boolean function. It returns true or false. So I will say if send Gmail Who am I sending it to? Email. Who is it from? It's from username. Is that what it was called, username? The password is password. The subject is subject. The body is message. If that returns true, then we'll do something, otherwise we'll do something else. What are we going to do if it returns true? We are going to just write the current date and time into column 1 of our current row. So column A value is going to equal now. If it fails, then we want to just say column A equals failed. So as it's running, we're going to see response for every row that we send. It'll either have the date that the message went out, or it will fail. Why might it fail? We could have a malformed email address. You know, it could fail in a bigger way if we don't give our correct credentials. It'll start failing like crazy. So hopefully we get that right. Wow, I think that's it. Let's stop this code. And I'm going to put a breakpoint right here now, and I'll run to the very first one. Okay, it's asking for my Gmail account. I've got a couple of them. I'll use my thegov account. Thegov. Password. My double secret password. And we'll say OK. And so at this point, we've got here. So if I hover over these, email, we've got the email that we're sending it to. We've got the username we're sending it to. I'm not going to show you my password. We've got the subject. We've got the message. It looks like we're ready to send it. Let's give it a shot. I'm going to just use Shift F8 to try to send this. It'll take a second. Ooh, looks like it failed. Everything was going along so well. So we've got the message up here. Problem sending a message. At least one of the from or sender fields is required. So maybe it wasn't called username. What was it called? We had a username. From or sender. Username, we're sending it. All right, I'm going to step into it. I'm going to come back here and step into it. F8. And the message was at least the from. Oh, here's the problem. So if we look at the user form, okay, let me stop this. If we look at the user form, I'm telling you, listen, don't put in your @gmail.com. That's there already. And I've got to be able to have that. The @gmail.com has to go with it. And right now, at that point, it didn't. So I've got to go make it do that. So here's what I'm going to do. As soon as I read that value in from the form, way up here where I've used the user form, so my username is going to equal that text concatenated with @gmail.com. And we'll run it again. The gov. Okay, look at the username. Now the username is fully specified. Hopefully it's going to work. It's taking a little bit longer. And comes to here. It's writing that value out and ready to move on to the next one. And let me go check my email. And shouldn't have to refresh it. Yeah, this is one I sent at 1:39. That's not now. That was when I was making sure this stuff worked for class. Okay, so here one came in. Oh. You know what? It doesn't show because I sent it to and from the same account. But fortunately, bluecono@gmail.com. Connor, Whittington. Connor, are you here? Thank you, Connor. Working along and gave me this one. Dear Evelyn, when I heard about the trouble you had with your Jeep Cherokee, sincerely, Connor Whittington. And hey, there's Connor's phone number. Okay, so you can see that it works. Yeah, and actually, when I send, if you send a Gmail account from your Gmail account to your Gmail account, Google goes, yeah, you don't need to see that. You just wrote it, for crying out loud. Might be able to see it in your sent items, but it doesn't display. So that was the problem I had there. I think. Does it show up for you when you do it? Really? Anyway, I don't know. Okay, so well, you see that it's going through. Now, that's sending email. Please don't run this thing out because I get them all. Number 2, Gmail is like limited to 100 messages a day per account. And so if you're going to do, thousands of these, you're going to have to find a different email provider to do your bidding. Anyway, so that's just one limitation. So now the question is, in the next 5 minutes, how can we possibly be able to learn how to send text messages? And the answer is, we send text messages the same way that we send email accounts. Same way we send email addresses, email messages. Question, yeah? Cool. So if it can't send your Gmail, if you've typed in everything correctly, username and password, you want to make sure, and I kind of snuck this in, you want to make sure that when you're reading the value off of the form, you can concatenate on @gmail.com to it. You did that? Super TA to the rescue. Go see if you can find the problem with your code. All right. Every email provider has what's called an email to text gateway. If you know the person's phone number and their provider, then you can send an email message. And that's what we're going to do. So I've given kind of the main providers' gateways right here. So if you're on, who am I? I'm on Sprint, I think. So all you have to do is send an email message to the 10-digit number at messaging.sprintpcs.com, and that will come through as an email, or as a text message. I have built a function that I think will work called getAddress. You give it the 10-digit number and you give it the carrier, and all it does is it does a lookup on this page for the carrier, and then it builds the full email address. What was that thing called? Called getAddress. Question, go ahead.
How do you look it up if you don't have one of those?
So if it's not one of these, how do you find the one for yours? The answer is just Google it. You just want to find the email gateway. There's published lists of these things. Every provider that has one, and there are some really kind of low-end providers that don't provide this gateway service, but the vast majority of providers do. So let's just go ahead and send a message. And it's going to take a while to send all these messages out. So let's just say, listen, when we're done with the loop, let's just have this thing send a text message to me telling me that it's done. We'll just say send email. I'm not going to do anything with return value, so I take off the parentheses. The email I want is going to be getAddress. I pass it my telephone number, 801-372-0683. Yes, I just gave you my cell phone number. 801-372-0683. And it's a Sprint number. Username should be the same username, same password. I think the subject is optional for the text message, but done. And the message is, Master, I have completed your bidding. Now if you could just complete my spelling for me. Okay, so that should send me a text message. Let's see if it works. Let me put my phone to where I can hear it. What, do I have something wrong up there? Yeah, don't all. This is the first time I've ever given out my text message because until recently, I paid some nominal amount for text messages, and now it's part of the plan. All right, let's see if it works. So let me just drag the current position indicator down here. Cross your fingers. That was kind of quiet, but there it came. There's a message. Do I want to reply? Do I want to view the message? There it is. Subject done. Master, I completed your bidding. So just send a text message to my phone. Questions? There's no cost to this. Yeah, whatever it costs you to receive a text message is what it costs. So if you have a plan that says text messages are included, there's no cost. I don't have to have any account to be able to send this. It is an open relay. The disadvantage is I have to know the provider. And usually about this time, someone goes, well, couldn't you write a loop and send it to every provider? Could you? Yes. How many of them will get delivered? Only the right one. Should you do that? You shouldn't do that. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So that's the example. All right? So we're going through, sending off the data, send a text message, and it really gives you some good flexibility and power to do that.
Is get address just, is that inside the same Gmail function?
So where is get address? It is another function in mod Gmail. It's just at the very bottom. Yeah, and it's really simple. It takes the carrier, it just goes and loops through the data that's on that page, finds a match in the carrier, and then says it's going to be 10-digit number at whatever the gateway is for that carrier, and then returns that. Yep.
Is there a code list that shows all the carrier names?
Oh yeah. You just Google text email to text gateway. There are hundreds of carriers. Some carrier that's out in the Philippines, they got an email to text gateway, and you can get it. Used to be that if you knew the telephone number, you could look up what carrier. You still can look up which carrier provided it, but I guess about 10 years ago they said, you know what, you've got to be able to change your carrier and take your number with you. They called it local number portability. And so you can still look up who issued the number, but you're not sure that's who still has the number. This number was actually issued by Verizon, but now Sprint's the one that handles it. So, okay, questions, folks? That's it. It's a pretty good day. I will see you on Monday. Class dismissed. Okay, some students are having trouble sending, and that's because you need to be able to, you got to tell your Gmail account to allow less secure apps to be able to interact with their interface. And so to get there, I'm going to come to any browser, and I'm going to go to this URL. Oops. I'm going to go to this URL right here. So www.google.com/settings/security/less-secure-apps, and I'm going to turn on allow access for less secure apps. So it's probably off when you get here. We'll turn on, and that should allow it to go through.